No alien could control it, but the armor chose her instantly. The chosen outcast. The mining station's fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across the cluttered laboratory, making every ancient artifact look like a sleeping monster. Zara Blackthorne, hunched over her workbench, her weathered hands delicately brushing sediment from what appeared to be a fragment of crystalline metal. 3 years since her disgrace. 3 years since the Academic Council had stripped her of her credentials for unorthodox research methods, and she was still finding herself drawn to the most inexplicable relics the galaxy had to offer. Another dead end, she muttered, setting down her microbrush and rubbing her tired eyes. The fragment had been promising. Unusual molecular structure, energy signatures that didn't match any known technology. But like so many others, it remained, stubbornly inert under her analysis. The mining station on Kepler 442b wasn't exactly a prestigious posting. Most of the crew treated her like a curiosity at best, a cautionary tale at worst. Former Dr. Blackthorne, they whispered, the woman who claimed she'd found evidence of pre-galactic civilizations, the woman who'd insisted that consciousness could be embedded in quantum crystalline matrices, the woman who'd been laughed out of every respectable institution in human space. A sharp knock on the lab door interrupted her brooding. "Zara, you in there?" The voice belonged to Marcus Greeley, the station's chief engineer and one of the few people who still spoke to her like she was human. "Come in, Marcus. Just trying to make sense of today's haul." He entered, his oil-stained coveralls a stark contrast to her pristine lab coat. "Got something special for you." The deep core extraction team pulled up something unusual, even by your standards. Despite herself, Zara felt a familiar flutter of excitement. "Unusual how?" "It's about the size of a person, perfectly preserved in a crystalline matrix. Looks almost like armor, but the metal..." He shook his head. "It's not reading on any of our scanners. Thought you might want first crack at it before the corporate boys decide to ship it off-world." Within minutes, Zara found herself in the station's main cargo bay, staring at what could only be described as the most beautiful piece of ancient technology she'd ever encountered. The artifact was indeed humanoid in shape, a full suit of armor that seemed to shift between deep purple and midnight blue, depending on the angle of the light. Intricate patterns covered every surface, not etched or engraved, but somehow grown into the metal itself, like veins of liquid starlight frozen in time. How deep was it buried, she asked, circling the containment field that held the artifact suspended in midair. Nearly 3 kilometers down, in a chamber that shouldn't exist. The geological surveys show solid rock all the way to the core, but somehow there was this perfectly spherical cavity, like someone had just wished the stone away. Zara nodded absently, her trained eye cataloging details. The armor's design was unlike anything in the xenoarchaeological databases. It wasn't crude like early human military gear, nor was it overly complex like the Baroque stylings of the Alteran Empire. This was something else entirely. Functional yet elegant, ancient yet somehow timeless. "Have you tried activating it?" Marcus snorted. "Tried everything. Direct power coupling, resonance frequencies, even had Commander Petrosky's boys run some military activation protocols. Nothing. The thing's been dead for however long it's been down there. Mind if I take a closer look? Be my guest, just don't blame me if it decides to wake up and start shooting." Zara approached the containment field controls, her fingers hovering over the release mechanism. Every instinct she'd developed over 2 decades of xenoarchaeology was screaming at her to be careful, to follow proper protocols, to document everything before making direct contact. But something else, something deeper, was pulling her forward. She deactivated the field. The moment the energy barrier dissipated, the armor began to hum, not audibly. Zara felt it more than heard it, a deep resonance that seemed to vibrate through her bones. The patterns along its surface flickered once, then began to glow with that same liquid starlight she'd observed earlier. "Zara, step back," Marcus warned. But she was already reaching out, her bare hand extending toward the armor's chest plate. The moment her fingers made contact, the world exploded into sensation. Images flooded her mind. Vast fleets of ships unlike any she'd ever seen beings of impossible beauty and power. Battles fought not just in space but across dimensions she couldn't even comprehend. She saw the armor's creation, watched as master craftsmen who weren't quite human and weren't quite alien poured their very souls into its crystalline matrices. She witnessed its first wearer, a warrior scholar who had fought to protect reality itself from things that existed in the spaces between thoughts. And through it all, she felt the armor's consciousness, ancient, patient, and desperately lonely. "You understand?" It whispered directly into her mind, not in words but in pure meaning. "You see what others cannot. You believe in possibilities they deny." "Zara." Marcus's voice seemed to come from very far away. "What's happening to you?" She tried to respond, but the armor was flowing over her now, liquid metal spreading across her body like living quicksilver. It didn't hurt. If anything, it felt like coming home after a lifetime of exile. The patterns that had seemed merely decorative now pulsed with purpose, forming neural interfaces that connected directly to her nervous system. In seconds, she was encased completely, but instead of feeling trapped, she felt liberated. Her senses expanded beyond anything human perception could achieve. She could feel the station's power grid humming beneath her feet, could sense the electromagnetic signatures of every living being within a kilometer radius. More than that, she could feel the armor's vast reservoir of knowledge opening to her, millennia of accumulated wisdom flowing into her consciousness. But with the awakening came consequences. Deep beneath the planet's surface, ancient systems that had lain dormant for eons suddenly sparked to life. Defensive networks activated, sending out signals that hadn't been broadcast since the fall of the Xerion civilization. Across the galaxy, sensors that had been waiting for exactly this moment began to register the impossible. The legendary armor of the Voidkeeper had chosen a new host. "Fascinating," came a new voice from the cargo bay entrance. "Simply fascinating." Zara turned, her enhanced senses immediately cataloging everything about the newcomer. Human, male, approximately 45 years old, elevated stress hormones, concealed weapons, military bearing despite civilian clothes. His eyes held the cold calculation of someone accustomed to violence. "Director Castellanos," Marcus said, his voice tight with surprise. "I didn't know you were on station." "Emergency inspection," the man replied, never taking his eyes off Zara, "though it seems my timing was fortuitous." "Ms. Blackthorne, would you mind stepping out of that equipment?" Zara tried to speak, but the armor's systems were still integrating with her neural pathways. When she finally managed to respond, her voice had an odd harmonic quality, as if multiple octaves were speaking in perfect unison. "I don't think it works that way." Castellanos smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Oh, but it does. You see, this artifact was flagged by our deep space monitoring stations the moment it was extracted. We've been trying to activate Xerion technology for over a century. Imagine our surprise when a disgraced archaeologist manages what our best scientists could not." "This isn't Xerion," Zara said, the armor's knowledge flooding through her. "It's older, much older." "Semantics. What matters is that you're wearing property of the Terran Federation, and I'm here to collect it." "I'm afraid that's not possible," Zara replied, and even as she spoke she could feel the armor's defensive systems coming online. Energy coursed through the crystalline matrices, and she realized with growing alarm that the suit was preparing for combat. Castellanos must have sensed the change too, because his hand moved toward the weapon concealed beneath his jacket. "Ms. Blackthorne, I'm going to need you to remain very still while my technical team determines how to safely remove that armor." "There is no removing it," she said, the certainty absolute in her mind. "It has chosen. The bond is complete." As, if to emphasize her point, the armor's external patterns flared brilliant white, casting stark shadows throughout the cargo bay. Somewhere in the distance, alarms began to sound, not the station's emergency klaxons, but something deeper, older, coming from beneath the planet's surface. Marcus was backing toward the exit, his face pale. "Zara, what did you do?" I answered. "A call that's been waiting 10,000 years," she replied, and suddenly she could feel them. Ships moving through hyperspace, converging on Kepler 442b from across the galaxy. Some came with scientific curiosity, others with military precision, and a few with intentions that made the armor's defensive systems spike with anticipation. "You've activated a beacon," Castellano said, his weapon now openly drawn. "Every hostile force in the sector will be here within hours." "Then I suppose," Zara said, feeling power flow through her like liquid lightning, "we'd better be ready for them." The armor had chosen her, but as she stood in that cargo bay with alarms wailing and enemies approaching, she began to understand that being chosen was only the beginning. Somewhere in the vast network of the armor's inherited memories, she could sense others. Other suits, other chosen ones scattered across the galaxy and waiting for the call that would unite them. The first test was coming, and with it, the first glimpse of what she was truly meant to become. The Hunter's pursuit commander, Thex Voidrender, felt the neural implant behind his left ear pulse with incoming data, as his flagship, the Shadow Claw, dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Kepler system. The cybernetic enhancement that replaced half his skull gleamed dull silver in the bridge's crimson lighting, its quantum processors interfacing directly with the ship's tactical systems. His species, the Draconians, had always been hunters by nature, but Thex had elevated the pursuit to an art form. "Target signature confirmed," reported his second-in-command, a scarred veteran named Krell, whose own cybernetic modifications were less extensive but no less deadly. "The Xerion armor activated approximately 6 hours ago. The human is still planetside." Thex's golden reptilian eyes narrowed as tactical data flowed directly into his consciousness. The armor's energy signature was impossible to mistake. He'd been hunting Xerion artifacts for the better part of 2 decades, following every rumor and fragment across the galaxy. But this wasn't just any relic. The quantum resonance patterns matched theoretical projections for one of the legendary Voidkeeper suits, artifacts so powerful that most scholars dismissed them as myth. "Begin orbital scan," he commanded, his voice carrying the harsh consonants of his native tongue even when speaking standard Galactic. "I want to know everything about this human. Background, capabilities, potential escape routes." As his crew worked, Thex retreated to his private quarters, a Spartan space dominated by a wall of holographic displays showing the faces of his greatest hunts. But it wasn't the trophies that drew his attention. It was the small shrine in the corner, where a fragment of crystalline metal rested on a bed of midnight silk. His people's last hope, or so the dying shamans had claimed when they'd sent him on this seemingly impossible quest. The Draconians were a proud warrior race, but they were also dying. A genetic plague had swept through their homeworld 3 centuries ago, leaving their DNA increasingly unstable with each passing generation. Fewer children survived to adulthood each year, and those who did often suffered from degenerative conditions that no amount of cybernetic enhancement could fully compensate for. Thex himself bore the scars of the plague. The reason half his skull had been replaced with quantum processors wasn't just for tactical advantage, but necessity. The fragment in his shrine had been discovered in the ruins of an ancient Draconian temple, buried beneath layers of volcanic ash from their world's death throes. The shamans claimed it was a piece of the great armor their ancestors had once worn in service to the Xerion Empire, back when the Draconians had been more than just raiders and mercenaries. If they could find the complete suits, if they could unlock the secrets of Xerion biotechnology, perhaps they could finally heal their people. "Commander," Krell's voice crackled through the comm system, "we have a problem. The human escaped." Thex was on the bridge in seconds, his movements fluid despite the extensive cybernetic replacements in his legs and spine. "Explain." Terran Federation strike team attempted to secure the target approximately 1 hour ago. The humans somehow fought them off and commandeered a mining vessel. She's currently accelerating toward the outer system. The tactical display showed a small industrial ship pushing its engines well beyond safe parameters, trailing superheated plasma as it fled toward the asteroid belt. But what caught Thex's attention was the energy reading surrounding the vessel. The armor wasn't just protecting its wearer, it was enhancing the ship itself, somehow interfacing with its systems in ways that should have been impossible. "Fascinating," he murmured. "The armor has bonded completely. It's not just wearing the human, it's transforming her." Orders, Commander. Thex studied the pursuit vectors, his cybernetic processors calculating intercept courses and escape probabilities. The human had perhaps a 20-minute head start, but she was flying an ungainly mining vessel while he commanded one of the fastest ships in the Draconian fleet. Under normal circumstances, this would be over within the hour. But these weren't normal circumstances. That armor contained secrets his people desperately needed, and if the human died in the pursuit, those secrets might die with her. Launch the interceptors, but keep them at maximum range. I want her herded, not destroyed. And signal the rest of the fleet, establish a perimeter around the asteroid belt. She'll try to lose us in the debris field. The Shadow Claw surged forward, its exotic matter drives pushing it to velocities that would have liquefied an unaugmented humanoid. Thex felt the familiar rush of the hunt, the predatory satisfaction of a quarry that might actually prove challenging. Through his neural link, he could monitor his ship's systems, the status of his crew, even the quantum fluctuations in local spacetime that might indicate his target's next move. The mining vessel had indeed made for the asteroids, but as Thex's fleet closed the distance, something unexpected happened. The armor's energy signature began to pulse in regular intervals, and suddenly asteroids throughout the belt started responding. Ancient mining equipment that had been dormant for millennia sparked to life, their automated systems reactivating with purposes their original programmers had never intended. She's turning the entire belt into a weapon, Krell observed, his voice carrying a note of professional admiration. Those old mining drones are forming attack formations. Thex watched as hundreds of mechanical units swarmed toward his interceptors, their industrial cutting lasers repurposed into surprisingly effective weapons. The human wasn't just running. She was fighting back with resources she shouldn't have known existed. The armor is teaching her, he realized. It's sharing its knowledge of ancient systems, showing her how to interface with technology that predates her species by millennia. One of his interceptors took a direct hit from a modified ore processor, its shields flaring before the pilot managed to evade the improvised weapon. Another found itself caught in a tractor beam designed for capturing asteroids, its pilot struggling to break free before the beam could drag it into a collision course with a chunk of space debris. Commander, we're losing tactical advantage. Recommend we withdraw and— No. Thex's voice cut through the chatter on the bridge. This is exactly what we need to see. The armor isn't just protective equipment, it's a teacher, a guide. It's showing the human capabilities she never knew she possessed. As if responding to his observation, the mining vessel suddenly changed course, diving deeper into the asteroid field where the debris was denser and the gravitational fields more chaotic. Thex's sensors lost lock for several seconds before reacquiring the target, now moving in patterns that defied conventional physics. She's using micro wormholes, his navigation officer reported, voice tight with disbelief, somehow creating temporary spatial distortions to skip between asteroids without traveling the intervening distance. Thex felt something he hadn't experienced in years, genuine excitement. This wasn't just about the hunt anymore. The human was demonstrating capabilities that could revolutionize everything they knew about Xerion technology. If his people could learn to replicate even a fraction of what she was doing. Set course to intercept at grid reference 77 Alpha. And signal the fleet. No one fires unless fired upon. I want her alive and functional. Sir, that will take us directly through the densest part of the field. Navigational hazards are irrelevant. If a human in a mining vessel can navigate those hazards, so can we. The pursuit continued for hours, a deadly game of cat and mouse through the asteroid belt. The human proved remarkably resourceful, using everything from gravitational slingshots to controlled debris avalanches to stay ahead of her pursuers. But gradually, inexorably, Thex's superior numbers and firepower began to tell. It was as they approached the belt's outer edge that everything changed. The mining vessel suddenly stopped, hanging motionless in space as if waiting for something. Thex's tactical officers immediately assumed it was a trap, weapon systems powering up and shields reinforcing. But the commander held up one clawed hand for patience. Scan for anomalies, he ordered. She wouldn't stop without reason. The answer came moments later as space itself began to ripple around the mining vessel. Reality distorted, colors shifting into spectrums that hurt to look at directly, and suddenly they weren't alone anymore. Ships began emerging from what could only be described as tears in the fabric of space-time. Vessels of impossible design that seemed to exist in more dimensions than the standard 3. Xerion ships, Thex breathed, his cybernetic processors struggling to analyze what his organic brain insisted couldn't exist. Actual Xerion ships, not just relics or reconstructions. The newcomers took positions around the mining vessel in a protective formation, their hulls gleaming with the same liquid starlight patterns that adorned the armor, and from the largest of them, a communication signal reached out across space. Not electromagnetic radiation, but something that bypassed conventional physics entirely and spoke directly to consciousness itself. "The Chosen One is under our protection." The voice carried harmonics that resonated in frequencies no living species should have been able to perceive. "Withdraw, hunter of the dying race, or face consequences beyond your comprehension." For a moment, Thex considered his options. His fleet was formidable, but these weren't normal opponents. These were the beings who had once ruled a galactic empire that spanned dimensions, who had created technology that seemed more like magic than science. But then his gaze fell on the fragment in his private shrine, transmitted to his consciousness, through his neural link. His people's last hope lay somewhere in that impossible fleet, in the secrets they guarded, in the armor that had chosen a human over all the military personnel and alien dignitaries who had tried to claim it. "Open a channel," he commanded. "Sir, they're not using standard." "They'll hear me." Thex stepped forward, his cybernetic systems interfacing with the ship's communication array in ways they weren't designed for, quantum processors burning at their limits as they tried to bridge the gap between conventional technology and whatever the Xerion ships were using. "I am Commander Thex Voidrender of the Draconian Fleet," he transmitted, pouring all his authority and desperation into the words. "I seek not conquest, but salvation. My people are dying, and we believe the armor contains knowledge that could save them. I ask not as a hunter, but as a son watching his race fade into extinction." Silence stretched across space for long moments. Then, unexpectedly, it was the human who responded. "I can feel your pain," came Zara's voice, but changed, now carrying harmonics that spoke of deep connection with forces beyond normal understanding. "The armor shows me your people's suffering, their courage in the face of extinction. But the knowledge you seek comes with a price, and responsibilities you may not be prepared to bear. Name your price. Join us, not as captor or conquered, but as ally. The armor chose me, but it also calls to others. There are fragments scattered across the galaxy waiting for those worthy to bear them. The Xerion Empire fell because they became isolated, arrogant. We will not make the same mistake." Thex felt his breath catch in his throat. Through his neural link, he could sense his crew's confusion, their readiness for battle warring with their desperate hope. The fragment in his shrine seemed to pulse with anticipation, as if recognizing something in the human's words. "And if I refuse? Then your people will die with their pride intact, and the galaxy will be less for their passing." It wasn't really a choice at all. Thex had spent 2 decades hunting Xerion artifacts hoping to find salvation for his race. Now salvation was offering itself to him, but only if he was willing to abandon everything he thought he knew about strength and conquest. "Stand down all weapons," he commanded his fleet. "Signal our compliance." "Commander?" Krell's voice carried disbelief and not a little concern for his leader's sanity. "We are no longer hunters," Thex replied, his golden eyes fixed on the impossible, ships surrounding them. "We are students, and perhaps if we prove worthy, we might become something more." As his fleet powered down their weapons and began to assume non-threatening formations, Thex felt something he hadn't experienced since childhood. Hope. The fragment in his shrine was resonating now, singing with harmonics that matched the patterns, flowing across the Xerion vessel's hulls. Somewhere among those ships, among the knowledge they carried, lay the salvation of his people. But first, he would have to learn what it truly meant to be chosen.